It's 11 a.m. in Washington, where the Supreme Court has rejected a challenge targeting access to a widely used abortion pill. The unanimous decision was the court's first ruling on an abortion-related case since it overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. So for more analysis on this ruling, we want to bring in CBS News campaign reporter Shawna Mizelle and CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford, as well as CBS News legal contributor and professor at Loyola School, Jessica Levinson, law school, rather, Jessica. So, Jessica, we're going to start with you. What are your big takeaways from the ruling, and what sort of precedent does it set for other cases?
My big takeaway is that the Supreme Court said no to the two groups who were challenging the FDA's changes to making Mifepristone easier to access. The big takeaway here is the doctors who were not doctors who prescribed Mifepristone, who were not doctors who were forced to treat anybody who had rare side effects after they took Mifepristone. Also, with respect to the medical associations who themselves, the court said, did not have an injury in fact, is that the court said you must be injured, not somebody else who you're trying to stand in their shoes, but you must be injured before you can walk into the courthouse doors. And I think it's really important that the court spoke here with a unanimous voice saying, here's what you need for something called Article 3 standing. You need to be injured. You can't be asserting somebody else's injury. That injury, that government action, you need causation to show that your injury was caused by whatever you're complaining about, and you need to be able to show something called redressability, or you need to be able to show that you can get a remedy. And what we see throughout this opinion is the court saying no, no, no to all of the plaintiffs' allegations here, that they can be the ones to try and assert this suit.
Jan, let's go over to you now. What is the significance of this unanimous decision, given how divided the Supreme Court tends to be?
Well, I mean, Jessica just analyzed that so brilliantly. I mean, I totally agree with everything that she said. I mean, I think, yes, this is an issue of standing, and that's a jurisdictional issue, a threshold issue. The court did not reach the merits of this case like the lower court judges did, because they said that those doctors had no business suing in the first place. But it's still a significant ruling, Vlad, because it sends a clear message to the lower courts and puts the brakes, I think, on some of these efforts you're seeing in the lower courts to get at abortion access, to try to get the issue of abortion back in the federal courts and back before some federal judges, particularly conservative federal judges, who might restrict it even more in states where it's not restricted as it is in some of them. So it's an important message on this kind of bedrock principle of, you know, who can have their day in court and what you have to show. I think based on how they've written this decision, it's also not going to be hard for some of the other people who've said they're going to sue next. And, you know, Idaho, 3 states, Idaho, Missouri, and Kansas has signaled that they may try to sue and come in here and continue this challenge against the FDA. But I think they're going to have a hard time, too. And it's an important principle, because you can't just have people willy-nilly, you know, running into the court every time there's something that they get mad at and disagree with. You have to show that, as Jessica explained, that actual harm, that imminent harm, something that's really directly affecting you in a harmful way. And that wasn't here in this case.
Shawna, I want to talk to you about the politics of this whole thing. You know, as you know, Democrats have really tried to make abortion a key issue during this election season. Is this likely to give them some momentum heading into the 2024 election?
Well, the Biden campaign is certainly still attempting to do so. I want to read a statement from a senior campaign official with the Biden campaign to CBS News saying it would be a devastating mistake for voters or members of the media to take away from today's ruling that medication abortion is now safe from MAGA attacks. If given the chance, Donald Trump will ban medication abortion nationwide. In fact, his allies have a plan to do so using executive actions that would circumvent both the courts and Congress. That's just in from the Biden campaign, a senior campaign official reacting to this decision. So we can certainly still expect all of this to continue to be politicized.
Jessica, let me ask you, how does this decision, does it give any indication on how the court may rule on other abortion-related cases in the future? Because this one seems, even for those of us who are not lawyers, pretty cut and dry when we talk about the issue of standing, but it's in the application of the law that I'm curious about. What do you think?
So it does seem cut and dry, although, as Jan has pointed out throughout the morning, there were 4 federal judges who went the other way when it came to the standing doctrine. So I think this really it's worth emphasizing. I know we keep saying the word standing, but it's worth emphasizing the court saying, here's how we protect access to federal courts. Here's how we protect the courthouse doors. Now, having said that, I think that's why we shouldn't read too much into this case. I don't think we should read into this that anybody on the court thinks what the FDA did was right or wrong or arbitrary and capricious or not. I don't think we should read into this anything about what the court will do in that other a big abortion case that we're watching, the case out of Idaho, where we have an Idaho law that says abortions only when it's necessary to protect the mother. And then we have a federal law that says if you show up in an emergency room, you should be given necessary stabilizing treatment. I don't think that we can say, oh, well, now because of the standing decision in this case, it means that X, Y, or Z will happen in that Idaho case.
And Jan, this is the first decision made by the Supreme Court since the same group of justices overturned Roe v. Wade. But how much of their decision is really about abortion rights? I mean, this is actually kind of not about abortion rights.
Right. No, this is about, a jurisdictional threshold issue of who can sue. So this kind of reasoning in this case will apply to all kind of other federal cases that people try to get in and out of courts. And to Jessica's point, again, just right on the other abortion case that we're talking about now, it also isn't directly about the right to abortion. I mean, you're looking at whether these two laws conflict, and does federal law conflict with state law, and then what happens. So these are cases about abortion access, no doubt, but it's not necessarily about the underlying right to abortion, which, of course, the Supreme Court said we're not going to decide that anymore. That's up to the states.
Yeah, Jessica, Justice Kavanaugh says that those who object to what a law allows others to do can always, and I'm quoting here, seek greater regulatory or legislative restrictions on certain activities. I thought it was also interesting that he is relying on what people call conscience protections in federal law, saying that doctors shouldn't be required to provide treatment or assistance that would violate the doctor's religious beliefs or moral convictions. But how often is that applied? Because it would strike me that sometimes it would be hard to, with the Hippocratic Oath, such as it exists, to engage in that kind of medical practice if you have these other held beliefs that seem to violate the Hippocratic Oath.
This was a fascinating conversation that happened during oral arguments where Justice Amy Coney Barrett said, what about the federal conscious objections, which essentially say if you have a genuine moral or religious objection to providing a certain type of care, I'm being very broad here, then you can't be forced to. And she said, would this law, would access to Mifepristone, would any doctor be forced to perform an abortion or be forced to help a woman who is experiencing a rare side effect to Mifepristone? Would they be forced to walk in there and provide care? And the answer to her was very specifically no, that the federal conscious objection standard, that law that protects people with moral or religious objections, that still applies. And that's what I think you see pervading the opinion. I did a quick, control find for conscious objections, and I saw that it really comes throughout the opinion where it solidifies and it supports what the court is saying throughout the rest of the opinion, which is the people who are saying they're injured, they had another option. And there was something that Justice Jackson said in oral arguments too, where she said, it doesn't seem like you're saying these specific doctors should not be forced to provide care to women who have rare side effects to Mifepristone. It seems like you're trying to prevent that access for everybody else who's not complaining. And I think that really goes to the crux of why that federal law we've been talking about protected those who need to be protected and why those who sued did not have enough of an injury to move forward.
Shawna, before we let you go, are you hearing any political reaction yet from the decision?
We had Republican Senator Josh Hawley say that he was there for the oral arguments, and so he was not surprised by this decision. And we also had that statement from a Biden campaign senior official saying that, voters should not be dissuaded into believing that medication abortion access will be safe. They are saying that Donald Trump's presidency would still pose a threat to access to that medication. And so we can certainly expect people to continue talking about this in a political aspect, even following this decision and looking ahead to how the Supreme Court would rule in that EMTALA case.
All right, Jan Crawford, Shawna Mizelle, Jessica Levinson, so great that you were able to join us and make time for us. I know you've got incredibly busy schedules because you're servicing practically all of CBS News, but we thank you very, very much for spending some time with us.